is going to talk to us about lessons learned. Mary Morrison began her work with hybrid meetings nearly 15 years ago during video conference calls while working for the city of Tacoma. In the years since, the technology has grown up and people have become more at ease with their online presence. In 2015, Mary leveraged those experiences with Sound Advice, Toastmasters Club, as it worked with leaders in the states of Alaska and Washington. To bridge the geographical gap, the club turned to various technologies, including Skype and the most recently, Zoom. In 2020, members adapted to a fully online process, and now, like many clubs, Sound Advice is preparing to consider an even better return to serving members as a hybrid club. Today, she'll share some of her lessons learned as tips for clubs that aim for spectacular. Ladies and gentlemen, Mary Morrison.
8 hours of planning for each hour of training you deliver is the industry standard. I'll repeat that again. 8 hours is the average time it takes for planning when you want to deliver an hour of training. I learned that early on in my career, and it was a very valuable marker to use as I began to design meetings, because I was pretty frustrated at how much time I would spend for a 1-hour meeting, till I remembered 8 hours of planning, 1 hour of live. It's that planning that really makes the difference. Mr. Toastmaster James, I couldn't have provided a better setup, and you and I didn't even talk about some of the tips I'm going to share that will help you create that kind of environment that James was talking about, where you do get to be a bit more vulnerable and experience the other's humanhood. Some of the ways that I have, what I always keep in mind when I'm going to do a kind of meeting design, and I'm speaking here both for clubs like this that may have unique meetings each time, but the same thing is true for those of us that attend kind of a standard meeting and are thinking of how do I apply all this moving forward. Think about, what is the purpose of your meeting, or that segment of your meeting you're trying to do? What design will meet that purpose? And how will you need to adapt it so that it is both accurate and non-discriminatory and inclusive for your online audience and your face-to-face audience in a way that is synchronous for both of them? I first start with think it through. You really have to do some good planning. Build in a greeting process that acknowledges that sometimes those attendees in person are going to really focus on each other. You may want to have, there's multiple ways you can go about any one of these. I think the most common one for me would be have 2 greeters. Have a breakout room for people who are joining you with your technology so that they can get a chance to know each other. Assign a club member. Make it a one-on-one experience if you need to. If members bring their devices in and they can Zoom into the meeting also while they're there in person, you can create some really good interactions with people who are both in person and online. The group participation, those things that James talked about where you might want to do this with, think about table topics, think about evaluations. Really think creatively at this point to get people engaged. It really falls into a number of different categories. And I would say that there are 4 very common. The first one is the way we do a speaker. One speaker, many people. It's one out to all of you. You're hearing the same message at the same time. Not a lot of interaction there. More common, you might have some if you're in a group in an in-person setting, You might pair people up. That's really good if you want people to answer a specific question and just give people a chance to chat with each other. If you have to adapt that, it's a little more difficult to do with an online to in-person presence without everybody having the right equipment. So think ahead. If you want people to break into pairs, you want to ensure that everybody's got the kind of equipment that they might need. If you're going to do it in breakout rooms, then you want to have enough breakout rooms. You may have to create them on the fly. You all know how to do that. I'm not going to get into how we all do that, but just you have to think through the design. And actually, one of my tips is I wouldn't do one-on-ones. I wouldn't do pair. I think it's just not as satisfying for anybody. But I would go to my most popular choice and the one that I've used a lot. Go to a small group setting. And there is a lot of beauty in small groups. And when I say small groups, I try not to have more than 6 people in a group, depending on how much time you've kind of given them. But at a minimum of 3 people to a max of 6 people is a really nice number for a breakout room, or for a small group setting. Because when I say breakout room, I mean that because we're doing it in hybrid only. But think about you're doing it online only. But think about you've got a hybrid meeting, and now you have a choice. Do you have people have their devices and work with people only everybody come and you do all of the breakouts using Zoom or using whatever technology you have? Do you put the people in the room in small groups together and the people online in small groups together? Or do you do a little mix? They're all possible. They all work really well. And it kind of depends on how much structure you want to plan in advance and how well you're going to be able to work with the people that you need to work with, the Zoom master, the Toastmaster, in advance. One tip I've carried over from my in-person days of facilitating is whatever the questions you have, whatever you're posing, put it in writing and make sure everybody has it. Because that is true whether you're meeting in person or online. People only remember about the last 3 words they've heard. I only remember about the last 3 words that I hear. So make sure you give them the question in writing so that they remember what it is that they're discussing. Let people know what to, before I close out, this last point. Are you planning a report out? If so, this goes back to your purpose. What's the purpose of the report out? What are you going to do with that information? And is it for all participants to have, so you've got a way to get that to them afterwards? Report outs, often you can actually record the breakout sessions so that people can have that information, and then you can compile it and send it to participants afterwards. Again, part of that is the design and think that through. Another common one we use, and the final one I'll mention, is the panel, like we're having tonight, where it's a number of speakers, and then we'll have some good Q&A afterwards. That's another great way of getting people engaged. And not much of that changes, but you'll need to make sure you've got a chat master to pay attention to the chat. And that could be really valuable during that session for the Q&A. There is a 20-minute rule I follow, where I try not to have people speak or present more than 20 minutes at a time without there being some kind of interaction. Goes back to James's point, but to be really practical, 20 minutes is about the most that people can really absorb of what you're saying. The later it gets in the evening, the shorter that time should be. Get people the handouts in advance. Really helpful for those of us who need time to absorb the information, especially if we're going to be interacting with any of them. They need to download them. They need to print them. Whatever they might need to do, save them to their screen. It's very common to have handouts in person, but you have to think about that person, that those people that are joining you that aren't going to easily be able to walk to wherever you've got those handouts. So make sure you've got the handouts to the Toastmaster in advance so they can be prepared for your group. If you're going to use PowerPoint, make it as simple a process, or any kind of presentation besides speaking, make it as simple as possible. I actually gave up using PowerPoint at presentations a number of years ago because unless I could practice in the room with the equipment, I found there were so many things that could go wrong, from the placement of where the lectern was to how the sound came out. That's my preference. You could practice with it and use it. Get people's cell phone numbers to each other. So if something goes wrong, they've got it in advance. That's a tip we used in Sound Advice a number of times when we were having our hybrid meetings, so that people could connect with each other over phone if they were in small groups. It didn't always have to be using the platform you had at hand. There are so many more tips that I could give you. You're going to experience lots of this as your clubs transition to hybrid. But remember, the point that James was making is one I heard also. You want to ensure that people feel included, and they will have a spectacular experience. Mr. Toastmaster.
Game over.